Good morning, everyone, and it is my great pleasure to open this morning's Women's Health Conference and to welcome you all here to Smock Alley Theatre here this morning. Finally, then, our last panel will take a look to the future. Where do we go next for women's healthcare in Ireland, and what are our aspirations? What do we want to see achieved for women in Ireland in terms of meeting their healthcare needs? I think you'd agree it's incredibly empowering and incredibly powerful to see so many women collectively speaking with one voice to advocate for better healthcare for women in Ireland. For so many years, we have been under-resourced and not cared for in the way we would like to be. We have to ask the question, when we look at things like menopause and menstrual health, why have we consistently taught our young girls and women that it's actually acceptable or that it's okay or normal to be in consistent pain, fatigued, distressed and under pressure? It's not normal and it's not acceptable, and there is help out there. So we have to shake off that culture of telling women that that's just your lot and you just need to get used to it. It's the wrong message to be sending to young girls and to women. And I think it is quite empowering. The topics that we're discussing here, you know, we haven't got every particular health issue for women platform today. I specifically selected some of the topics that I feel we've only really started to open up and talk about in the last number of years. And we want to have that open and honest conversation as women and be transparent about those issues that affect all of us, and to shake off those shackles of taboo and embarrassment and say these are really normal health issues and we all go through them and we go through them together. And with that in mind, I think it's powerful to say today that what we want is better healthcare for women in Ireland, and today is the start of pushing for that and talking to not just everyone here in the room, but to all of those watching remotely on our social media channels. I think we'll have a really powerful and uplifting and positive conversation today with all of our panellists and with our audience as well. And just as some housekeeping matters, we have our emergency exits indicated on the left and right. Our bathrooms are just to the back if you go out the door on my left as you go out. And if anybody would like to contribute to the debate, at the end of the panel, there will be a period of time allocated for a Q&A session. So just raise your hand, I'll have the microphone and I'll have a friend helping me as well. So we'd like to get as many members of the audience contributing and engaging in the discussion and asking questions, because we're all here to have the conversation together. So what I'll do is hand you over to our first panel and this morning's moderator, Alison O'Connor, who is very well known to all of you and probably needs no introduction, but I'll introduce her in any event. So Alison is a journalist, broadcaster and editor and author. She writes a weekly column for the Irish Examiner, and as a current affairs commentator she regularly appears on radio and television. Her most recent book, It's a Yes, co-written, and ladies, really
discussing all of these topics. The title of this session, Good Menstrual Health and a Positive Menopause, and we've already had a chat there earlier before we come on, and the question was raised, well, can we raise the issue of vaginal dryness? I said, I'll be disappointed if you don't. And I was thinking, in my house, I have two daughters, so we're running, given the title, the range of from where menstruation has started and just started, and where menopause is very definitely on the horizon. And as my daughter saw me putting on a HRT patch some time back, she said, what's that? And I said, you know the way your hormones are going this way? She said, yes. Well, I said, mine are going this way. So I'm going to introduce you to my panel now, and from my chat with some of them earlier, you know, there's an awful lot to be said, and as Lisa said, there will be questions afterwards. So sitting here right beside me, I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Fakwazia. It's good. Faika. Her family to be targeted when the Taliban took control of the country. Named on a kill list, they fled their home and now have refugee status in Ireland. Dr. Faika's wish is to contribute to the health service in her adopted homeland. Beside Faika there is Dr. Ciara McCarthy. Ciara is the GP clinical lead for women's health with the Irish College of General Practitioners. She is a Cork-based GP with a specialist knowledge of women's reproductive health and a member of the ICGP's Council. Ciara will lead the expansion of the ICGP training programme in women's health for Irish GPs in recognition of the demand and need for women's health services at general practice level. Ciara works in a large suburban practice in Cork. Beside Ciara is Shampa Lahiri, and having spent over 20 years living and working in Ireland, Shampa didn't even have a local GP when she was diagnosed with cancer in 2019. As a teenager, she was diagnosed with endometriosis at a time when treatment options were limited. Shampa's cancer journey had severe side effects which impacted all aspects of her life. Having navigated the Irish healthcare system for the last few years, she's keenly aware of the challenges faced by women, in particular ethnic minorities. She uses her skills to advocate for better patient outcomes, and she has joined the Irish Cancer Society's Advocacy Network. Siampa is actively advocating for more equitable outcomes for all patients in the Irish public health system. Besides Siampa, we have Catherine O'Keefe, who is the founder of Wellness Warrior and creator of the Menopause Success Summit. She is Ireland's first menopause coach and workplace educator. Catherine helps women achieve optimum health and well-being in perimenopause, menopause and beyond. She has worked with more than 150 companies on menopause support in the workplace, including Workday International, State Street, Department of Health, Sainsbury's and Microsoft. And last, but certainly by no means least, we have Nora Casey, who, Nora, as many of you will know, broadcaster, entrepreneur and human rights campaigner, formerly a dragon in the Dragon's Den, and recipient of numerous awards. Nora is an author, and her TEDx talks include The Cure for Grief and The Courage to Leave. Nora's digital learning platform, Planet Woman, seeks to empower women, and much of her life is devoted to mentoring SMEs and female founders globally. As well as owning Harmonia Publishing Limited, Nora odd range feel about going to their doctors and discussing the various issues.
But I think there's still a part of the journey that needs to be travelled. I suppose we talk about the Joe Duffy effect, and I think he opened the conversation about menopause, because for the last 20 years HRT was, I don't want to say it was a taboo topic, but it wasn't widely used, it wasn't widely prescribed because of fears that were proven to be, I suppose, exaggerated. And he has certainly, encouraged women to come in their droves to their GP to speak about menopause and to find solutions. But I think there are areas that we certainly need to improve on. I think we are.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second? When you say come in their droves, describe to me the sort of before and after, just in terms of.
So I would say before the Joe Duffy show, I would rarely see women. Heavy menstrual bleeding, things like that, pelvic pain, that they, your GP can help that, and if, the secondary care service, health service can help, and that, there are services there and we're looking to improve them.
So, and tell me then, on those issues, the urinary incontinence, the vaginal dryness, do you see many women? Even though, are there a lot of women suffering from these symptoms or conditions, and do you see a lot of them?
We see them, but I don't think it's always the reason that they're coming to see us.
Right.
They may be coming with something else. So say, one of the things that we see after menopause is that there can be an increased frequency of urinary tract infections, of bladder infections, and that's associated. So when we look at those as a symptom of menopause, they're grouped with things like vaginal dryness and urinary incontinence. So it's only when I suppose someone might come to you with bladder infection, and when you inquire about any associated symptoms, they divulge them. But I think if you hadn't asked, they mightn't have volunteered them.
Yeah. And at the other end of the spectrum then, in terms of young women beginning to menstruate, and maybe it not being straightforward, perhaps having very bad pain, that there's undiagnosed endometriosis. What's the state of play at that end of things?
So the Women's Health Action Plan was launched by the Department of Health in early March, and there includes in that a plan for expanding and improving endometriosis care. So improving, I suppose, facilities for the diagnosis of endometriosis care, but also for the management of, I suppose, I don't want to say straightforward cases, because I think, there's no case is completely straightforward, but that there would be services within regional health, and then also two specialised endometriosis care centres, one in Dublin and one in Cork, that will be able to care for patients who need the care of a multidisciplinary surgical team, so that they would have access to urology surgeons and colorectal surgeons. And up until now, those services haven't existed in a kind of a defined service, kind of amalgamated service. where there will be a referral pathway from, say, if you have a patient in Galway or in Donegal who needs to access that there will now be a kind of a defined referral pathway that they're.
And for delivery and other issues that women needs, they can't go alone to clinics. It's a terrible situation in our country.
Yes. And for you in Ireland?
Fortunately, I'm in Hull, Ireland, and I hope for future I have a chance to work.
Yes, yes.
For
with
improving
all your experience.
Health, yeah, for women health improvement. I wish to work as a a doctor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Shampi, you also came to Ireland a lot longer ago than Fianna. And you have, I suppose, looking as I read out your bio, you could talk to us on any number of of angles. So I'll let you pick up as to where, from what you've heard earlier, and how you'd like to get into your story.
I mean, many of the things that the other panellists have spoken about resonate with me. I turn 50 this year, and for 38 years of my life, I have suffered chronic and debilitating pain. And so for 38 years of my life, I feel that I have been at war with my own body. And we talk about all the external influences that bring us down and all the challenges of life and the day-to-day things that we all suffer. We all have hurdles in life, every single one of us. But some of those hurdles are higher for some of us than for others. And the chronic pain that I have experienced largely went undiagnosed, and then when it was diagnosed, I never sought follow-up treatment for it. So, school, and you're either going through pain, or you know that in a couple of weeks you will again be going through the same or worse pain. And it felt never-ending. As a child, when I was 15 years old, when this was first diagnosed, I asked my GP for a hysterectomy because I couldn't cope with the pain. And their feet are put into a set of stirrups and they're subject to an invasive internal examination. I say they, I mean I. This is my experience. I can only talk from my own experience. And as a result of that one experience, I never went back for treatment. So for 38 years, I went through this pain, and I managed the pain on my own. And I managed it with industrial quantities of analgesics. So I just bought over-the-counter drugs, and I became quite dependent on these over-the-counter drugs. I don't mean medically dependent. I mean, I couldn't leave the house without knowing that I had these drugs in my handbag, in my back pocket of my jeans. I had them in my car, in my office. I would leave them at friends' house, because if the pain came on at any time, I needed to know that I had access to these drugs. When I moved to Ireland, these drugs weren't available here. I think by and large, Australia, where I grew up and where I was diagnosed, tends to be a little bit more advanced than Ireland when it comes to access to medication. So these drugs weren't available here. So every year when I would go home to Australia, I would buy up a year or two supply of these drugs. I put them into my hand luggage because I didn't want them getting lost in my suitcase. And then every time I came back through passport control, I was waiting to be pulled aside for drug dealing, for having period pain medication in my hand luggage. So these are the things that we as women get very good at navigating. I would like to see any man live for 38 years, home, life, career, and I want to see him do it in 4-inch heels.
Hear, hear. Nora, from your perspective on, I suppose, dealing with you have spoken, we mentioned it earlier, you're currently dealing with long COVID, which you've spoken about previously. But in terms of being an Irish woman, menopausal woman, what are your experiences of that and the general approach and how women speak about it or don't?
So I do have long COVID, and it's a different kind to the first iteration. I think my brother has long COVID from the first time. He still gets breathless and fatigued, but I had COVID in January, and it was really, really an easy COVID. I was bragging about how easy it was. I worked through most of it, but 4 weeks later, I got very sick very quickly, and my blood pressure went up to 200 over 120. I was in hospital for 2 weeks, and the upshot was inflammation in my brain, in my lungs. I'm type 1 diabetes all of a sudden, so I shake quite a lot. I get the sweats. I have neuropathic headaches, so sometimes I start to speak. I called my mother Mary the other day, and her name is Mags. But I can lose the train of thought, so if that happens, I'm sure that Alison will save me. But I have to say, I have lymph nodes that are enlarged on the back of my neck that are just about to be removed. I can talk to you about that openly. I've been in many boardrooms and on programs, and everybody feels a degree of sympathy and empathy with me. But if I mentioned in a boardroom when I was CEO any of the symptoms, they're very similar to the menopause, especially issues. I get palpitations all of a sudden, I get brain fog, I get headaches. Sometimes I feel a little bit more anxious because of it. There's no way. At that time, I was running 4 companies. I was the only female of 46 CEOs. I reported to Paris. I lived in London. There would be no question of me saying, sorry lads, I'm having a bit of a hot flush now, if you just give me a few minutes. Nobody talked about it. And I think as women we go through journeys, and you've just spoken very eloquently about it, from periods, which happily I had a mum and older sisters to help me navigate through. I had IVF, I lost babies, had a beautiful baby, and then hit the menopause. I think that we have to remember that when women hit the menopause, sometimes it's at a critical life stage. It doesn't just happen in isolation. I'm part of a sandwich generation. I think some of you are too. So while I was going through perimenopause, my husband died after a very aggressive bout of cancer. My sister had died a few months beforehand. I suddenly was with a young child as a single mum on my own, and also with parents who were elderly and frail. And I was running 3 companies. In fact, through Dragon's Den, I had 15 investments. So I can tell you that menopausal symptoms are not aligned to superwoman status. They do everything in their power to ensure that you're diminished in every possible way, and the acceptability or otherwise within the environment you work plays a huge part in that. At this stage, I've just been on a ship where Gwyneth Paltrow does all the wellness, and of course she's spoken a little too much maybe about the menopause. Lots of celebrities have spoken about the menopause. Have you seen a single female politician? Now bear in mind that it takes almost the whole of our lives. I grew up in the Phoenix Park, 8 of us in a 3-bed house. I'm not going to do Angela's ashes, but I went to a DESH school for socially disadvantaged people. The likelihood of somebody like me ending up running companies is minuscule. I still go back to that school. It's very tiny. And here I am about to take the hot seat running my own business as a female founder, and God or the universe gave me a different kind of hot seat and threw loads of symptoms on top of me. And that happens to every woman. If you think of Christine Lagarde, think of our 2 presidents, think of all the senior female politicians across Europe and the world, Kamala, just imagine. Do you think they don't get the menopause? Do you think they didn't have menopausal symptoms? Do they ever at any point say, sorry lads, hot sweat coming on, bit of brain fog, don't ask me that tough question just now? So long as they don't talk about it, their employees and people who look up to them will not feel that it's acceptable. Celebrities are one step removed from all of us. We see it as being heroic that they talk about the menopause, but they're not relying on anybody else. They'll still get their next part in the movie. In fact, they might get a better chance of getting the next part in the movie. People like Gwyneth, her entire brand is built around talking honestly about these things. But you never see a businesswoman standing up and talking about it, because they know that they would be lesser if they spoke publicly about it. I would like to say to Lisa that I'm not a political person. I've never joined a political party in my whole life, but I am political. And I think today is fantastic, because if other political parties led the way in dealing with issues around women's health, we wouldn't have successive, awful tragedies in this country. I just did 2 documentaries on the Magdalene women who had to fight for redress, Ireland's dirty laundry. I was executive producer. It was my 3rd. I worked with Vicky Phelan and the people surrounding Vicky on the cervical check scandal. I'm an amazing warrior woman, and we have produced, myself, Loretta Digman, who I'll bring up in spirit today, Catherine, and others. We've been talking about it for years, running webinars, global webinars. I work with Vital Voices, which was set up by Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright. So I'm on the European board, and I'm a global ambassador. I work with women all over the world. We're no different. I work with a woman in Delhi who runs a huge company. She's going through the menopause at the moment. I would say that my mentorship is as much about the life stages these women, often going through difficult splits and divorces, it's much higher during the menopause. Now, you can read into that what you will. Either we all get a reality check during those years or run for the hills. But I do think that these issues for women are very significant. And as employees, Nurse Kate, I was talking to, I don't know if there's many nurses in the audience, but I met Nurse Kate earlier. Just before COVID, I was speaking about period poverty in DOCAS, which I do a lot of work with. Kate works in the prison side in Wheatfields. But you know, the issue about, and there's a lot of highly physical jobs on 12-hour shifts, not like me bleating about I can't go to the toilet and go through my hot flush. They have no capacity. They end up working on a ward where there's no one else to take over from them, and they're going through menopausal symptoms. So the INMO knows that this is a huge issue for them. So our employees won't get a better deal, I don't think, out of their employers until the CEOs themselves own up to the symptoms. So that was a long answer, but...
I know. Thank you, Nora. Catherine, you, as I said earlier, you have worked with many, many companies, and at corporate level. So what Nora was speaking about there, do you think that is changing? And I have a second question that you might come to as well then afterwards. I read a column by the columnist Sarah Carey in The Independent sometime in the last year. And Sarah was saying that she objected to all of this talk about the menopause and how debilitating it can be for women and how difficult they can find it and how it can affect them, because she felt that reflects badly and poorly on women and their ability to carry out their job, and that it doesn't affect all women like that. So you might address that as well.
Remind me with brain fog, but we'll come
no problem.
Come back
no
to
problem.
It. No, so from the first perspective, if you look at it, workplaces are stepping up.
Right.
And that's across the board, from retail to manufacturing to office, financial, etc. But we have a long way to go, and like Nora was explaining, you know, different scenarios, you know, with nurses and so forth. You know, what about women involved in transport? If you have urinary issues, which we know are massive in menopause, where maybe you need to go to the toilet more often. If you're confined to a bus or a car or whatever, that becomes a nightmare. You can also say on the manufacturing side, if you've got a woman who's on the factory floor, if she's in a synthetic uniform, depending on the ingredients, hot flushes can just become an absolute cold dread, because the ingredients in the uniform can make them worse. So when we look at it from the point of view of the workplace, we've got to look at it from the specifics of the role a woman is doing. You can't just take it as, you know, you just one size fits all. So, you know, looking at it from the specifics of the role is really important, and a lot of companies are doing that. And I think,
and as speaking to Nora's point then, at how senior a level are you seeing women owning
yeah,
it?
I think that needs work. Right. Like ideally, when I work with companies, I always kind of say, you know, this has got to come top down. Right. We need to see it as a strategic, we need a compassionate conversation that's going to extend throughout a workplace. And, you know, ideally, you know, we want to start seeing more senior managers, female senior managers coming out and talking about it.
But how do you do that without undermining yourself professionally?
I think that's where you start opening and supporting the conversation. Like there's some great companies. I mean, look at Anne O'Leary in Vodafone. Right. She's done a great job in embracing menopause, and not just in Ireland, you know, across the world. But I think we need more of that. We need what Charles Sandberg did for pregnancy in companies. We need that for menopause. I always kind of say I'm going to be very excited when she hits menopause, because, you know, I think she'll create a lot of changes. So it needs to come top down, but it also, we don't want to put it all on women. We need men to come on board as well, because when it comes to menopause, it's everybody's business. It's not just the woman going through it, it's the family, it's the children, it's your friends, it's your work colleagues. We're all impacted. Like, you know, I've got 3 boys, and, you know, we're always kind of saying, like you mentioned earlier, they're going through puberty. I'm on the opposite end with the reversing hormones. But like, when I have a bad day, we all do, when you get narky and you get cross with them, it's nice to be able to say, listen, I'm sorry, it's menopause, my hormones, and it's that upheaval. Ideally, I am really passionate that we get menopause onto the secondary school curriculum, on the SPHE classes, so that, like Shampa said earlier, it's increasing knowledge with girls and with boys, but especially with girls, so when they go to the doctor, they know what they're talking about. Like the amount of women who I'll talk to about menopause symptoms and they're like, oh, I didn't know that was menopause. And it's like understanding your bodies and actually knowing, you know, what are the symptoms of vaginal dryness? What are the symptoms of urinary incontinence? You know, what are the emotional symptoms of menopause? Will suffer brain fog.
How do women go about doing that, even collectively, without giving fodder to that argument of you can't rely on women, look, if that's what's going to happen, you know, why do women want to reach for the stars in terms of their career if this is going to be their middle years and what it's going to be about? I
firmly believe women are, we know in the 45 age group plus, fastest growing demographic in the workforce. Women, we want careers, we enjoy our careers, we love what we're doing, and we need to be supported in doing that. One of the things is that we can support each other collectively, but then we also need that support to come, not just from the workplace, we need it to come from society, from the government. It needs to be a 360 support, because menopause, particularly the early perimenopause years, when you don't know what's happening, can be really lonely and really isolating. And this is where we need, all employers will want to help, the majority will. And it's just a matter of, I think, supporting menopause doesn't have to be expensive. It's just thinking outside of the box and thinking practically. But you know, it needs to be, and it's not just the workplace, it's women across all of society, minority groups. We need to make sure that education extends. Like, as I mentioned to you, I've done a lot of work working with the unsettled community, working with women with intellectual disability and so forth. And that's a whole area of society that we can't forget, because the conversations and the treatment options can be more challenging. And I think the key part really is that for a woman to thrive through menopause, because we all want to thrive through these years, we don't want 38 years or continuing of pain. The key there is knowledge and awareness, because with that education, you know, okay, here's who I can go to, here's how I can get help, here are my treatment options, and then on the back of that, you bring your support into play and obviously your lifestyle, and you bring it all together. But education it's the cornerstone, it's the foundation for women to thrive through menopause.
Thank you, Catherine. Kira, can I ask you, obviously there's been a lot of improvement even in areas like women going for smear tests, for instance, but I'm always very surprised when you hear on discussions like Liveline or elsewhere the number of women who say they had no idea that there was even such a thing as the perimenopause. So, and I'm just wondering, Catherine mentioned there, we'll say running an information campaign, but I'm just wondering how Irish women, how ill or well informed, where we sort of stand on those. You mentioned earlier the difficulty in raising issues such as the urinary tract infections and that, but it seems like it's a much wider, even on the broader picture, it's an issue.
And I think we have to, like you say, start in school. I think there's ground to be gained in terms of education about the menstrual cycle. About the different phases of the menstrual cycle. When are you fertile? When are you less fertile? What's normal? What's not normal? Because I suppose we're so used to accepting our lot, accepting what you've dealt, that I suppose, like Fianna said, that, people become anemic from heavy periods, but they think they're tired because they've got 3 children, or they think they're going through menopause. It's understanding that those symptoms are not just ground up.
Trying to get help there, and I think not very satisfactorily.
I think when you move into perimenopause and menopause, it's like you're a milk carton and you have your use by date stamped on your forehead, and it's like you're put out of commission. And I still have a lot of my life to live. I'm not ready to give up and disappear into a back room somewhere and have a hot flush. And we talk about women having careers and enjoying their careers. I think that conversation really needs to change from women enjoying their careers to women being good at their careers. I'm the general counsel of one of the richest companies in the world, and I'm now going through menopause. And my company will have to replace me, and the cost of replacing me versus just allowing me to experience my truth, and whether I'm having a hot flush or a brain fog or whatever it may be, our experience. We need to start. And we talk about the tone from the top. I'm in a company where all the men on the board, all the board members are men. So the tone from the top, I hear this all the time, the tone needs to come from us, wherever we are within a company, whether we are on the board, middle management, on the floor, driving a car, whatever we're doing, a nurse on the floor, we need to be more vocal, and we need to have opportunities to talk about our experience in a compassionate and understanding environment. So I have to say kudos to Lisa. I'm with you, Nora. I'm not a particularly political person. I'm not a member of any political party. But these are conversations which we need to start having in an open and compassionate way. And we need to start valuing ourselves more than what is currently, which is more than what I currently see going on.
I love that fighting talk. I think more of it. I'm going to go to questions now, but I just wanted to ask Fáil, because I suppose context is important as well. Do you think Irish women are lucky? Is their situation good where?
Compared to our, they are more educated people. They can learn, they can read from websites and other things.
Yeah.
But in our country, unfortunately, most of our women are illiterate people, uneducated people. Most of them can't read, at least in the rural area. And also they don't have too much ability to go through the website or to media to learn something. Just the best thing was that trained midwife from very rural area, from villages, that we brought the young girls or women and trained them and send them back to the villages to work as a family health action groups, or some of them work through the community and pass the health education messages to the people, and they give health education to the people how to they should take care of themselves and how they should know about the early stage of their menopause symptoms, and if they have some problem, they should go to the doctors. At least they can take some iron tablets or calcium or vitamin D and other things that they can improve their body. But unfortunately, all this thing is stopped, and it is.
That certainly does give us very good context. Thank you. So any questions? And if you want to generally, or you may want to put it to a particular member of the panel. Just down here, I see a hand raised, grey jumper behind, and then in the purple dress, the next. Then in front.
Thank you. I would like to know what would be the best steps to raise awareness in greater audience, because if it's not awareness about menopause, a woman would be shy to talk about it. We need to raise more awareness. So what would be the best steps to start?
Okay, and do you want to ask anybody in particular that? You're saying, so women that are shy about talking about the menopause. Do you mean talking to, we'll say, a doctor? Just in front there in the purple, and then behind you, Lisa, and the other side in pink,
Thank you very much. I just want to take the opportunity as well to thank Lisa for this. I am a member of Fianna Fáil, I'm a councillor, and I just want to commend this. It's not just this conference, it's been for a number of months now, on a weekly basis, bringing in stakeholders to the female members to have a worthwhile policy document at the end of this. So I just want to commend Lisa for the work on that. That whole process actually has kind of, I suppose, opened my eyes a bit more to it as well, and myself and Alison was speaking a while ago with regards to the brain fog, and it's leading me back to the education side of things that you were mentioning, Catherine, because I would class myself as being well educated and relatively confident, and I would have to say straight out to having known nothing in relation to menopause other than sitcom references to hot flashes or hot flushes.
They call it flashes in the States, which is probably why you're
that's
saying
exactly
that, American sitcom.
So, in the sense that until you're suddenly going to that for the good or the bad, and that has happened with them in the past. What is always commendable about those systems is that you get your letter in at a certain age for where you are in that system and what happens next. And I wonder, with the talks of the menopause hubs and that, I know GPs are absolutely slammed, I'm very, very aware of that. But should we be looking at something, because I think certainly schools, but those of us are now past the school side of things.
Wider,
We need to be, I think, more mainstreaming and and I actually looked up the HSE website, and it's, contact your GP if you're having trouble with your menopause symptoms, but most of us don't even really know what our menopause symptoms are, and I know it's wide and varied. So I just wonder, would Ciara or any of the panel think?
Point. Yeah.
Just have one lady that has a question on endometriosis, so I might bring her.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I was actually just recently diagnosed with endometriosis, so luckily enough, I'm only 22, so that was a very short period. I mean, 3 years, I say, is short, but I'm glad to have had such a short in comparison to most people. But I mean, only through my own research is how I found out about this thing even existing. So I never heard about it in school. I was wondering, if there are any plans, what are your plans for teaching young women about this in school through SPHE? I mean, I learned about my cycle, but I actually learned more in my science class in junior cert than my SPHE class. And then I recently saw, even in the UK, like, there are young girls learning more through TikTok about their menstrual cycle rather than through their schools. And I think I'd say the same here as well. I'm learning more online than I am that I ever learned through school. So yeah, I guess, what are your plans in place?
I think that picks up on the really important point made by some of the panellists about the need just literally at secondary school level, and I suppose on the work that Lisa is heading up in terms of getting a policy. Yeah, I think the woman behind you there in the pink, yeah.
Good morning, Alison. Good morning, panel, and thank you, Senator Chambers, for leading out on this wonderful policy and the conference today. My question is around brain fog, and was a client.
Oh, there's one there, is there? Yeah, okay.
Faye White, I'm the Women's Health Officer at the National Women's Council. Something I feel like I've really heard come across from all the experiences is that women's experiences of health are not taken seriously when they go to their GP in the workplace, and that they're not given that, they often feel dismissed and belittled, and that's something that we really hear in our work in the National Women's Council. And I suppose my question is for Ciara. What is being done to make sure that kind of medical practitioners, GPs, are listening to women, and what more could be done to ensure that there is that culture of care that women are taken seriously?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To discuss it at workplace, but it starts from the home, so that just like the sister there, Shampa, said that we are valuable. So the value has to start from home, so that all our boys, men, will be aware, so that when we go to workplace, it will not sound new or somehow to them. Let them know what we are going through, and the younger ones, let them know that it has to happen. And when it happens, let's support one another. Thank you.
Here. Yeah. Just there, yeah.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Fáil. I wonder if you could speak about the particular specific challenges that women in migrant populations or refugee populations living in Ireland might face in accessing care in terms of women's health.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and one more here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions. It's just brilliant to be in a room of women talking so openly. I don't have a question, it's more of an observation. Just when we're getting to the point of talking about women's health and not being because of Joe Duffy, the same health conference, or Cervix Havers Health Conference. And when we're talking about language, we need plain language, but we also need language that we recognise refers to us. So when we're talking about women's health care, we need the word woman.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm conscious of time and of not encroaching on the next panel, so I'll put some of those questions, and if you wouldn't mind keeping it brief. Catherine, I might just put you the first. If you're feeling shy, how do you broach the conversation?
Two things I would do. If you have an option to use email, I would send an email to your manager, boss, whoever, and I would just write it on an email, like if it's menopause related symptoms or even if it's menstrual pain and so forth. I would just write down, you know, I'd like to chat with you next week, give a bit of time, about some menopause symptoms I'm having or some menstrual symptoms I'm having. What that does is it gives the manager.
Thank you, Catherine. Ciara, that issue of women feeling, and that's a lot of stuff that did come up in those live line discussions, women saying, doctors either saying you're not bad enough, or I'm not giving it to you, or, you know, is there enough education amongst doctors, the medical community?
So I think that, like I said earlier, I suppose for 20 years, HRT was something that most doctors were told you shouldn't prescribe. Yeah. And we have to, you know, that culture doesn't change overnight, but I think how we change it is through education. Yeah. And the ICGP are working, I suppose, in conjunction with the National Women and Infants Programme on the kind of key priority areas that have been identified in the Women's Health Plan, and we would hope that by increased GPs
health service, and I'm sorry to say to keep, if you wouldn't mind keeping it brief.
I mean, in terms of ethnic minorities and racism in modern society, I think there is a danger when you generalise that you lose the power of the individual story. So I'm going to speak from my own personal experience, but I'm talking about those members of society who are at the lower socioeconomic scale of society. They tend not to have private health insurance. They're diagnosed with a chronic illness and they'll go into hospital for treatment. A very specific example of structural inequality in the provision of healthcare in Ireland is the fact that you have this accumulation of inpatient charges for chronic healthcare. So if you're at the lower socioeconomic scale of society, you tend not to be able to afford private health insurance, whatever the premium may be. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's €1,000. Every time I went in for chemo, for 18 months, every 3 weeks, I had to pay an inpatient charge. It was capped at €800 a month, €800 a year. So if you are at the lower socioeconomic scale of society, you are not going to have €800 floating. Unintended consequences of.
That's, yeah, it's obviously something we could talk about for a long. Fáil, do you, for women like yourself or for migrant women, is it difficult with the Irish health service if you need to go to the doctor, go to hospital?
Yeah. I was in refugee center in Roscommon.
Yeah.
There was 2 women that they had heavy bleeding in a long period.
Heavy bleeding, yeah.
Heavy yeah. They went to the GP, just the GP gives them some contraceptive pills, but they didn't do any more treatment or diagnosis. Okay. They need more diagnosis, tests and proper treatment.
Yeah, yeah, okay, all right.
That I've achieved at any other moment in my life. I mentioned the consequences of menopause, you know, when you're trying to be superwoman, and we all try to be that. Going back to the issue of inequalities, I was very privileged. And this is an issue where privilege is really important. For one thing, I know to research everything about my own health. As Fáil says, when she took control of her health, that's when things began to change for her. She's 4 years beyond a 1-year diagnosis. And I took control by learning everything I could possibly know about the menopause, finding myself a brilliant gynecologist. I couldn't afford to have those symptoms, that's the reality, so I didn't. I had brilliant HRT, I was managed throughout the whole process, I didn't have a single symptom after she took control of my life with me. Loads of women aren't in that category. There are loads of inequalities when it comes to the menopause. It's very, very hard to access consulting care without forking out €300. There's a massive shortage of HRT. And I'll tell you one thing that's happened in the absence of that. A whole bunch of charlatans have emerged since Joe Duffy. I mean, I am inundated with chefs who now produce menopause menus, wellness clinics that have it's like when organic came out.
I hate to cut you off, but I'm very conscious of the next panel. I would like to thank my panelists very much, and thank
Okay, everyone, we're about to start the next panel. If I could ask people to take their seats. We'd like to kick off with panel 2. If everyone can just grab a seat wherever you can, that'd be great. Thank you. that need to be addressed and discussed. It's about the fertility journey, so pregnancy, miscarriage, IVF and surrogacy. I'd like to introduce our moderator and our host for this, for all to work and study. And she's an advocate for breastfeeding, and in 2021 she co-organised and hosted a webinar on Feeding the Future, a shared responsibility held by the National Women's Council of Ireland. She is also working with Baby Feeding Law Group of Ireland and has highlighted that it was the 35th anniversary of the World Health Organization Code, which deals with breastfeeding of infants, and she has won Friends of Breastfeeding Advocate of the Year for her voluntary work in this space. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Dr. Evie Nihulavon. Thank you, Evie. Final thing I should have said at the outset, we have a hashtag for today's conference. It's hashtag WHC.
The questions that we got as well. We can collectively agree that we all want women's healthcare on the agenda, properly funded, properly resourced, and we may differ in how we want that to happen, but I hope that we can have respectful discussions about how we might work together in getting towards that end goal. I think something like this, where we're discussing policy and the conversations are going to contribute to policy, and then hopefully we'll see that policy enacted because there are more people talking about it. And I do think that the people's will and people power, the people conversation really helps to implementing policy like that. With reference to the previous conversation, I will say that I had COVID 2 weeks ago and I'm really not myself yet, and I also have a bit of brain fog, so if I forget someone's name, okay. And also, I had a baby who was up for an hour last night, and I think I'm certainly saying that more in my own work context, so I do think it's important that we just acknowledge it. We have families, we may as well say, I'm not on form today because I didn't get a full night's sleep, so my apologies if that affects anything in any great way. And I also want to say that even though, we're having this conversation and the state is 100 years old and we have, a really to note that in the global context that it's important that as a first world country who's relatively rich that we have this conversation so that it can actually have impact in other places. So what we're talking about today is the fertility journey, and obviously with that there are a lot of sensitive topics that our panel have had to deal with, and I'm sure many in the audience as well, so we'll try and keep that as respectful as possible. And I'll do a brief introduction to our panellists here. You obviously all have your booklets, but we have, I'll start with Catherine, who's right beside me, Senator Catherine Ardagh, who's the Shannon spokesperson on social protection, and she's also chairperson TED, and she has her honours degree from UCD, and I think we're actually in UCD at the same time, Rosanna, in different sections of UCD. Yeah, I know it's a long time ago. And she has a Master of Science in Personalised Nutrition as well. And we have Sinead Lucy Brennan, who is former director of Girls in Tech Dublin. She's a current member of the Government Disability Stakeholder Group. She sits as that Disability Stakeholder Group representative on the Assistive Technology Working Group and the Comprehensive Employment Strategy and Implementation Group subcommittees. Now we do have a fifth panel member, Professor Mary Higgins, Associate Professor in UCD and a Consultant Obstetrician and Gynecologist in the National Maternity Hospital. She's slightly delayed. I'm sure she's doing far more important things in her roles, and so hopefully everything is fine, and if she joins us we'll just bring her and welcome her on stage and involve her in the conversation from there. So thank you all of you for joining us today. Now I'm aware, as I said, I'm going to start with I guess the most difficult aspect of pregnancy and the fertility journey, which is pregnancy loss. And I know Catherine, Rosanna and Sinead, you can all speak to that. But Sinead, I wanted to start the conversation with you.
Absolutely. So I think for me as an individual, I feel like miscarriage implies a sense of blame or fault on my part, when a lot of the time it's something that happens regularly with women who do conceive. So I think I'd love to frame it as pregnancy loss rather than miscarriage. But I guess accessing the system in terms of that obstetric care And what I experienced with miscarriage, you know, we're lucky to live in a society where, you know, there is free access to maternity health care. Obviously, you have a choice whether you want to go through the public system or take a more private approach. But I think everybody's experience of pregnancy loss is very, very individual. I was unfortunate enough to experience the pregnancy loss during the pandemic. So access to the hospital and, you know, having that support was really, really challenging. I didn't have it at the time. And I think having reflect around me, you know, that was so the care that I got was second to none. I was very lucky to have very experienced people in the maternity hospital around me, but I think there was an element of feeling very isolated and very lonely during the experience because I didn't have the support. And again, you're in a busy maternity hospital, so the communication may not always be there. You know, they're busy people, they're running around, they're dealing with multiple people, they've got emergency C-sections, they've got all sorts of different initiatives going on. So you're trying to, you know, raise your hand in the middle of all that and, you know, advocate for yourself and advocate for your needs. So I was there. It was unfortunate, but and really stand up for what I need. So I needed them to write down what was happening, what the next steps were. You know, I had like advocated that I needed to be able to lip read. So, you know, they were pulling the mask down and saying, you know, this is where you need to go next, this is the next test, etc. So I think I was lucky in the sense that, you know, once I advocated for myself and I told them about my disability and I told them exactly what was needed in order to process the information, and then unfortunately having to leave the hospital, no prospects of this baby or of that baby, and you know, tell my husband, you know, at least I had something documented that I could kind of say, well, this is what happened, this is the next step, etc. So it was, for me, you know, quite a lonely time, especially in the aftermath. You know, you're grieving the loss. They said to me to go home and make sure that I properly grieved. You know, your friends, well, my friends were of an age where, you know, kids weren't happening. So for various reasons, some going through struggles to get pregnant, some just not in that space at all. So it was very difficult to talk about it. And I think, you know, I'd had somebody, unfortunately, my family passed away quite recently before that. You get, and it's down to the culture of the healthcare system, which on my first experience accessing it, I found to be great in places, and then there are gaps, but I think the gaps are an opportunity for education. Yeah.
Thank you, Sinead. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think I'm really hoping that that's what our conversations today will kind of show, the gaps that are there. And I do know that there are, in the policy that Lisa has, I've seen a draft that, you know, there'll be a bereavement team, hopefully specialist to every maternity unit, because it's very necessary. And there's a lot to take from that, the isolation and the loneliness with the pandemic. I can even speak to that being pregnant in the pandemic, and that's without having a loss. I don't even know what they were ourselves with. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's maybe a culture, maybe a learned behaviour within us all that we're maybe afraid to ask for what we need, or afraid to be seen as being difficult.
Yes.
And I think that's the word, you know, you feel like you're asking them to go above and beyond when really you're just asking for what you need. And I think it's no more than, you know, just a kind of a nice tone, and, you know, what do they say, something like smile to avoid conflict, but, you know, you ask for what you need and you just say, look, thanks very much, I actually need X and Y. So yeah.
Fully support what you're saying there, like as a nurse and a midwife, and as somebody who maybe has to break that bad news. It is very much a thing that I would say to every woman. Just keep asking us the questions. Like, some people, everybody deals with, say, bad news differently. That's what I'd say to everybody. And we can only, you know, read so much of a situation. And like, our aim is to give the best care. Well, I hope, you know, is to give the best care. And it's like, I don't want to push too much on somebody, and I don't want to give somebody too little. So the more we engage with each other, the better a bad interaction would be, because it's still bad news at the end of the day.
Rosanna, I might actually come to you on that, because I know yourself, you've unfortunately experienced the pregnancy loss as well, and you decided then to go down the route of surrogacy. And I know there's an Oireachtas committee starting to deal with this issue now, because it's kind of in a limbo, as in there's not the structures there right now to support families who feel like this is the only option for them. Can you talk to me about, having gone through that, what are those gaps that actually need to be addressed by policymakers who probably have no concept of it because they may not have gone through it?
Yeah, and it's such a complex issue. Well, just going dead end, so many specialists saying to me they had never seen the likes of it before in all of their years of practice. I was studying full-time for my master's at home that year in 2018, so I was able just to access the research that I needed. I knew how to research, but I appreciate that not everybody is able to, you know, look at the papers and studies that they need to look at to be able to develop the questions that they need to ask. And it is difficult being told you know, answers from doctors that maybe they tell to 100 patients a week, and you feel like you're getting nowhere with them. So anyway, we got to a point where it was advised that surrogacy would be the best option for us. We were in our early 30s, and you know, to all extents and purposes, we were fertile. There was nothing wrong with our actual fertility. By our, I mean myself and my husband. But we were just told surrogacy is the best option. We were sort of just left with that. It took a few weeks for me to process that information. The idea of a stranger carrying your child, you know, thousands of miles away is pretty terrifying to anybody. So we decided anyway that this was our best chance at having a family. And from then, I mean, literally I didn't do anything more glamorous than Google. I found at that point there was no information. You know, so I just had to really Google solicitors in Dublin that maybe have some experience in international surrogacy. We found somebody. First thing we did was go and speak with them. They advised us that Ukraine is, you know, a positive maybe country to look at surrogacy in for Irish married couples. From there, I was just given a list of agencies. Agencies work in tandem with clinics over there. List of agencies that this solicitor's clients had success with, and we were just sent home. And as I said, it was just a matter of Googling, finding out, doing my own research about people being that the surrogate and so the surrogate mother and the intended parents are very well protected legally and medically. So there was no sense that anybody was being exploited. All the contracts in place would protect both parties, and that gave us confidence to pursue it there. But I was given a long list of tests I would need to prove that my biological material and my husband's biological material was sort of healthy enough to place into another human. So this took really the guts of 10 to 11 months. I was very lucky. I had a very supportive female GP who was able to send me to various places for these tests. But it included things, obviously your hormone panel, which a lot of women will. It's sort of one of the first tests you will get if you've had a couple of miscarriages. But then more complicated ones, the STDs, infectious diseases. I had to have tuberculosis scans to ensure I didn't have tuberculosis, ovary scans to look for cysts, breast scans, cancer markers in my blood. Whereas then, obviously, as we know, fertility or infertility is very much a 50-50 issue with couples, and I'm pleased to see that more and more of us are understanding that, and it helps to take the blame away from the female side. So as I said, 10 months, I used to go into the GP on assisted human reproduction and surrogacy. There needs to be some kind of setup, some kind of clinic where you can get these tests done.
Or even a regulation to say that this is where the state has agreed with XYZ countries or XYZ clinics.
Yeah.
And this is probably what you will have to go through.
This
even
is
that in and of itself.
You need. Yeah. Another time I had to go to see a specialist hematologist in St. James's, and you know, getting a consultant appointment can take a while, getting test results. By the time I got those test results back, the 3-month limit on the infectious diseases had expired. So you're dealing with all sorts of roadblocks. Again, I was lucky. It's also prohibitively expensive to go through these tests, to go through surrogacy. You know, we were very lucky in very many ways that we could pursue this route. But then once you get accepted onto the programme, you're looking at the legal costs. And because of the lack of legislation in Ireland, I'd say 30% of our overall costs for the whole surrogacy journey went towards the legal side, towards the legal representation in Ireland, going through the courts then afterwards. And you know, there are so many gaps in the system that make it so difficult for most people to pursue surrogacy. And you know, for so many couples who have been through maybe cancer treatment or have some, you know, there are multiple reasons why people can't have families in their traditional way. Mine was obviously a history of multiple miscarriages and a diagnosis of infertility. I was told I wouldn't ever be able to carry my own baby. So, you know, there are so many roadblocks, so many gaps. As I said, I was very lucky that we had the means and the support, but so many people don't, and so many people don't know where to turn. And, you know, surrogacy is becoming more, I suppose, known about in the mainstream and more a route to parenthood that people are looking at now.
And it just needs the protections. People are doing it, so it needs to be
protected.
Outlined.
It needs to be protected medically and legally.
And I think this is where this space gets a little bit complicated. And I think women's health, it's almost like it can be very nebulous on the boundaries, because it doesn't all fall under one department and one minister, because this will come under justice. And there's lots of other things like, you know, victims of domestic violence, that is health and it's justice as well. And I often think things fall between the cracks because it's not just one person who's it under, but I don't think that's a good enough reason not to do it. So
And
I think,
of course, the children have to be
having those, but I also want
pregnancy loss and the dads, and not being able to, like, I think that's so hard when you go through it, like when you're going through a pregnancy loss in a hospital setting, or even if you, like, I had very early pregnancy losses, and I almost was like, did I actually have that? You're sort of gaslighting yourself, thinking, oh, I can't really grieve because it was only 8 weeks, so I didn't actually make the 12, you know, and that's sort of going through your head all the time. But I think sometimes, like, the men as well, and there's loads of men here today, they also feel a real loss and get no support. So obviously it's a Women's Day, but I always thought that through our whole journey that sometimes the men didn't know, were at a loose end, didn't know what to do. And I know Sinead's husband, so I can sort of visualise the whole situation, and it's really heartbreaking.
Or the partner in that
or
regard.
Or the partner,
you know,
absolutely.
Just because you're not the one pregnant doesn't mean you're going to be bereaved.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the whole understanding of.
What's IUI, sorry?
IUI, well, I'm going to, maybe Laura will sort of...
Intrauterine insemination, whereby it'll be for mild male factor or unexplained infertility, and they'll wash and purify the best sperm cells, and we'll say you take an injection to grow 1 or maybe 2 follicles, trigger ovulation, and at that day where you're about to ovulate, the best sperm cells, we'll say, are placed into the uterus, and they have like that head start at the perfect time to it increases your chances of conception to about 15% in the cycle.
Thanks, Laura.
So that didn't work. And every time it does.
AMHs and how ovaries actually work, and the 2 major things jumping out today is like education and openness. It's like the same themes are coming back and back, but IVF then, what will happen is under sedation we'll take out a number of eggs depending on the woman, and in the lab you either with IVF put the best swimming sperm cells on top of those eggs and you allow for natural fertilization just outside of the body, or ICSI is the other version for male factor because it is 50-50, and you inject one of the best sperm cells inside the egg, and then fertilization and embryo development is the same as natural conception.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to have you here for this part.
So, where was I? So anyway, we did a few rounds of IVF, and eventually after our 5th round, I'm sorry, well, I won't go through the...
No, but because
it's hard to...
This all ends up being quite expensive.
That's where I'm coming to. Yeah. So it's really expensive. Like your first round of IVF between all your tests and just like we had to do a lot of those sort of sending bloods to other countries to get, I don't know, something, karyotyping and some other bloods. There's a weird sort of name for it.
Depends what they are, yeah. There's a lot of
sending stuff to taking your hormones further. That hopefully will be obtained in the 2023 budget. But myself and Fianna have a bill that's actually, we got word today that it's going to be ready in the next few weeks. So we'll put the funding of IVF on a statutory footing so that like all these tests can be done in a public setting and IVF will be done in a public setting. Maybe at the beginning they might have to use private clinics, but the ultimate aim is to have publicly funded IVF in public hospitals. So that's really my my dream for IVF in Ireland.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, great. And something like that is great, because I do know of families who've just decided it's not going to work for us and we can't afford it. So we're just going to have to accept that we don't have kids. And if that was me, I'd be so heartbroken. I wouldn't be able, because it's something I've always wanted, and I've been very privileged that I haven't had difficulties. But I think it's great that, you know,
and we're quite
trying to get pregnant, and as I said, I'm very lucky. I didn't have to wait very long. But I just got so cross when I started reading, because similar to you, Rosanna, I'd be able to, I can access the research, it's where I work, and I see all these things, and it was like, why weren't we told this when I was a teenager? Because I would have done a lot of things differently. And talk to me about that, the education that you see that women have about their own bodies.
Yeah, so like education around fertility, it's just wild that I was a midwife, and one of my first we're not told any of it. We are told in school that you need to use contraception because you make one egg every month, right? And that could get fertilized and you're pregnant. And it's like I have these things I call the hacks, and one of them is like, assume you're couple number 90. Because actually, if you had 100 couples, in the first month of somebody who's got a 28-day cycle, so 12 cycles a year, that couple have a 20% chance of conceiving. Good God. So then if you get to month 6, 50% of the couples might be pregnant. And when you get to month 12, 90% will. Right. And after that, it's an infertility diagnosis. And nobody knows that. No. Like even my own friends, they try, it doesn't happen month 1, and they're like, what test do I need? What's my problem? Whatever. Now I'm all for testing and knowing where you're at early. But what I'm saying is, the message we've been given, the education we've been given is absolutely horrendous around like when we're younger and that. Yeah. Not that there isn't space for contraception, there absolutely is, but there's also a space for understanding that like you don't produce one egg per month. You actually bring forward a reserve of eggs, a number of eggs. So that might be, I don't know, at 25, it might be 25, let's say, we'll use the same number. And what it actually means is
when should this education happen? I mean, it's a theme that we've had in the previous panel as well. Like this, I imagine, should be, you know, from early
should
puberty,
be doing
10, 11.
Like the puberty part needs to be taught younger, and then you need to understand the actual biology of men and female in third year biology class, science class. Do you know?
Having discussions with the biology teacher about discharge, and that seemed wild to us. I mean, about looking out for changes in discharge across your monthly.
Or hormone. And you'll know exactly where you are in your cycle. Yeah.
So Laura, where does this need, is this the RSE curriculum? Is this the SPHE curriculum? Where would you, as somebody who's in this field all of the time, where would you see that or is it with the science curriculum?
I think it's in the science curriculum, because everybody has to essentially do science at that junior level.
You don't?
Do you not anymore?
No, it's not. It was never compulsory.
Oh, we were made to it. We had no choice of the subject.
Good.
Oh, right, okay.
Primary it is it?
Junior cycle is what Laura's saying. But my issue with that then, and not to go astray from our theme too much then, is that, you know, we hear a lot about the ethos of the school doesn't agree with this, and so we're not going to teach it. I really think that needs to be taken out when we're talking about RSE and SPHE.
Yeah, like if we're talking about all the things that are coming up today, it's like open, honest conversations, listening and like sharing and moving forward, and how that can be capped in an education setting seems like bizarre. It should be an open conversation. There was an excellent point about like our boys should understand at home like our periods and like all of those things. It's not like a single cure-all fix here. We need men and women to understand like, and like older generations, younger generations, everybody, like what is the fertility journey? What do people bear? I mean, my mom casually, you can't cap conversations.
If they want to learn more, it's almost like it's stopped because, you know, it should be just a conversation among women.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, like I also work as an andrologist, so I can test samples in the lab. And when I might be delivering the news, I would say like maybe 70% of men, when they get news that they maybe weren't expecting, will say, have you ever heard of this before? And that's really upsetting to me. You know, that men don't even understand that like, this is actually a part of normal biology, the sample.
And I think we're all a little bit difficult in that. When we're talking about the boys, I think that's a space, I think, that's not to put everything into schools, because teachers have enough to do. But if we have the right curricula that will be taught in every school, that's something I think that will be useful. I only realised the difference that it makes with my husband, who has 2 older sisters and a mum, and he talks about periods, hormones all the time. And initially when we started going out, I found it quite shocking, but it's great, because he will go to me, are you a little bit hormonal today? And I'll go, damn it, I am. And he
my
gets
husband
it.
learned so much about female reproduction over those few years as well, and now he could sort of name all these things, and yeah.
Can I talk to you all about the pregnancy aspect then? We've been, you know, we've discussed the pregnancy loss, the IVF, the surrogacy a little bit, and the fertility journey, but the actual experience of being pregnant, which you are thankfully going through at the moment, Sinead, which is wonderful. So I had hyperemesis with both my boys. With my first baby, I had a GP who just said, oh yeah, everyone is sick during pregnancy. You need to walk more and eat properly. And I was really devastated because I was getting sick, like 7 times in the morning before work. You know, by month 3, I was puking blood because I was getting sick so often. But when your healthcare provider tells you, no, it's grand, everyone's going through this, you're just like, oh, maybe I'm just being dramatic. What are you doing? Doctors come in and they were like, can we talk to you? Because we were on whatever internship. And I said, you can. Have you ever heard of hyperemesis? And they hadn't. And I was like, this needs to be on your education. Yes.
The mainstream initially.
So is it something that you've kind of experienced, I wonder, with your own healthcare providers, that something is happening and it's kind of maybe being belittled, or that it's probably not getting enough attention, Laura, within the healthcare education setting?
Yeah, like 2 things are jumping out to me that happened, so I was able to like, you know, I missed the step of, and how do I fix it? Yeah, or deal with it. And it's like, it can be normal, but you don't have to live with that. Do you know, like, you know, I kept getting this spinal analgesia, like, you know, so there is that balance. And I think it's a problem that sometimes you might be like, well, I don't do that as a nurse or a doctor or whatever, and I give really good care, but like, it's just listening and knowing that that next step is like, nobody needs to be sick in pregnancy. Like, we have all the medications to help it, and we wouldn't expect.
And this, Catherine, can you talk to me a bit about that?
Absolutely. Like we've been advocating for, you know, Carbon and other drugs to be provided on the drugs refund scheme, and to date there has been a clear indication from government that it will be, but I don't think to date it is yet, and it's so expensive. I think it can cost like, for over a pregnancy, nearly €5,000.
Yeah, it's about like £3,000 in my pregnancy.
Huge amount
and again, that's privilege. I can afford that because I have a job where I can afford that. But for a woman who is in a lower paid job, or can't work for any reason, she's not going to be able to afford this, and her whole 9-month pregnancy could be completely debilitating. But I do understand.
It's an easy
Lisa's-
fix. Not like if you
an
get
easy
the right
fix.
treatment, and the treatment, as you say, your friend was like, what do you like? Get
And I think that's another huge aspect that needs to be spoken about, is that it's mostly not your fault.
And you know, I think logically you know it's not your fault, but emotionally you're just you're in a space where you just you can't separate them.
There is this layer, isn't there, of like 2 different groups of information coming through, and very little are the on-the-ground staff coming out. Like, that's what the whole fertility hack was. I was like, well, I can interpret that information and just give it out, and it might be something as simple as like, this is absolutely not your fault. This is how, like, this is incidence rates of whatever it is, like for infertility, whatever, and even like that couple number 90, like, there's not, it might take 8 months. No one wants it to take 8 months. It's really frustrating, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to get pregnant. And it's that information gap that's causing that like self-blame where you go, was that me? Was that my cup of tea?
We've a couple of other things we haven't talked about yet, and I'm hoping they'll come from the floor in the form of questions. It's unfortunate that Mary can't be here. You know, it's not available to everybody who And it's lovely to see, if Adam's mummy doesn't mind, it's lovely to see a gorgeous little Adam being as good as gold here for the conference. He is really, in fairness to him, he's been the best little boy. Are there questions for our panellists? We have a lot of questions. And again, similar to the last, we might take a few and we'll deal with them.
Even, can I just update? I did get contact from Mary Higgins, and she was delayed at work, working in obstetrics and gynecology. That happens. And she was hoping to get here, so she does send her apologies.
My name's Rory, and I have a question for Sinead. I'm also a person with an invisible disability, so I found it enormously inspirational to see you up here talking and sort of taking that perspective. And I was wondering, do you think there's an intersection between disability and sort of privilege as well, and pregnancy health outcomes in Ireland? And if so, how large is this intersection, and what can be done about it? Thank you.
Thanks, Rory. And Lisa, another question over here. Adam's mum, actually. Ellen? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get your name. I just asked about your little boy. I'm sorry.
Thanks. Ellen Coyne from the Irish Independent. As a question for Rosanna. You were talking about how important it is for international surrogacy to be regulated, and I suppose it's unfortunate that that very important committee has been derailed a little bit over the last few weeks with some offensive stereotypes about people who've used surrogacy as a route to pregnancy. And I'm just wondering, as the government moves forward with this, do you have any concerns about families like your own having to listen to other people debating, you know, your choices, your access to parenthood, and us maybe repeating some mistakes that we've made in the past with repeal or marriage equality, talking about people without...
The surrogate mom's DNA be on the child as well when they are checking the DNA. Because the reason why I'm asking this question is that from African perspective, we look at surrogacy as something that maybe the other woman can come later to lay claim on the baby. So I just want to know about the DNA of that baby. Will they have the 2 mothers or what?
Okay, thank you. And
I would like to ask, is there any support for women who lost their babies while they are pregnant? Because we are talking always only about successful.
Similar here, it was very similar here at the time, and I was so struck by the awful language that was used back then to women who were miscarrying, and the kind of dismissal of miscarriage as a life event, that I tried to do some research on it, and I got women who were willing. I got them to write down their who basically swung that vote, who won the hearts and minds of the voters. They are being left behind because of the definition of a fatal fetal abnormality in our law. And it's kind of crazy to think that those women are one of the largest groups that still have to travel. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, we have there, and then I'll take that one last question. Thank you. After that, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. My name is Bridget Manton. I'm a county councillor in Swords at the moment, but I'm a retired primary school principal. And mine is more of an observation than a question, just to say that I did have 33 young women on my staff. And out of that 33, 5 of them had to take the IVF journey at different times. Now, that's a very high percentage of young professional women, but I just want to talk about the consequences of that on them. And okay, I had some understanding as a female boss, but if you did happen to have a boss who was male, it wasn't just the financial implications, it was the hormones, the moods, the expectations, the tears, it was the highs. How that this is a very difficult journey, and that in my case up to you could have 20% of your staff going through that, maybe at different times, but overall it's a really difficult
Thank you,
journey.
Bridget.
So I think
thank you for that, and thank you for your support of your staff as well. Now we are actually really short in time, but I'll take this one last question, and what I might do is I'm going to comment on some of them, because not everyone on this panel is going to be able to answer those questions, but we'll take this last comment, and
I'm a fourth-year pharmacy. Doesn't have a lot of money, saying yes to that. So I would just like to know about the ethics behind that and how you get about the imbalance of power. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps we'll take a comment on the surrogacy, but I want to say a comment on the surrogacy from a mum who's been through surrogacy, and not anybody who's in charge of the legislation or was involved in the Oireachtas debate. But just, Rosanna, just from your own perspective, I guess, on the language that's coming up around it, is that something that we could ask our public representatives to be a bit more careful about?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody is very much entitled to their opinion, and I'm definitely an advocate for debate and that kind of thing, but it is disappointing to hear negative language used, especially perhaps if you haven't been through the process yourself. We were in a situation where surrogacy was given as our only option to have a baby. Surrogacy isn't a choice you make lightly. It's challenging, obviously financially, physically, emotionally. We had a successful outcome, but what I will say, sorry, just to answer your question about the DNA, what we did was gestational surrogacy. So I did, say, the first half of an IVF process where my ovaries were stimulated, they produced eggs, egg retrieval process took place, and my eggs.
So just language of public.
She was very much involved in the whole process. I'm still very much in touch with her. That's another day's story. But we made sure that she was medically and legally protected at every stage of the journey, and I'm confident that she was, and I'm confident that she did it because she wanted to help out another couple.
Thanks, Rosanna. And I think for all the same-sex couples that are going through this as well, that we just need to be aware and respectful. I think we can have respectful. Now, I know we're up on time, but Sinead, just to speak to you a little bit, and I'm going to mould a couple of those in together. We've had a question on the pregnancy loss. Our GP, Marion, the dismissal of pregnancy loss and the language around it, and also perhaps coming to that, having a disability, and does that make it just a little bit more difficult, or actually did you have better skills to equip yourself dealing with the healthcare professional system?
I think it was both. The environment is something that's not really being talked about in this country yet. It is getting there. We're starting to see more women who are getting diagnoses of autism, ADHD, etc. later in life. And those women are now starting to access, if they choose to, the maternity system. So I think it's going to become more and more relevant as time goes on. And going back to the gaslit piece and just addressing the pharmacist, I had COVID in pregnancy. And again, you second guess yourself, you question yourself. It makes your disability more hard to manage. You know, you ask for help, medication. You know, obviously you can't get that much in pregnancy. You know, I had an episode where somebody went to buy me a box of Strepsils. The pharmacist said no, like, you know, it's a throat sweet. Like, I would have been grand. So it's little things like that. But I think definitely accessing the service as a disabled woman, you have to ask for more. You have to be able to stand up and advocate for yourself, because you're missing a lot of the nuances. You're missing verbal cues, sometimes social cues. Like, for a disabled woman, you want to be able to plan for as much as you can, and you can't plan for labour. So, you know, you might have as many birth preferences written down as possible, but, you know, I've heard they just all go out the window with first-time mothers. So, like, it'll go the way you need to, exactly. But again, it's just because of the disability, it's that bit more challenging, yet I have the skills from previous experiences, so yeah.
Thank you, Sinead. And very briefly, if you don't mind, Catherine, to speak to Bridget's question about IVF.
There was cross-party support in the Shannon recently for the reproductive leave bill, so which will means that sort of companies have to give employees leave for reproductive leave for miscarriages or for IVF. So it's gone through the Shannon, but hopefully it will go through the Dáil. And I think it's really important, because when I was a senator in 2016, that's when I was going through my IVF treatments. And I used to like sneak off, didn't tell anyone, ask for the earliest appointment in the clinic, come back, do it. No one knew. I did 5 of them, and I was wrecked and I was an emotional mess, but I sort of kept it all to myself. And I think it's great that people are talking about it, and we're starting, you know, the taboo is starting to disappear, I hope.
Now, we've got, I mean, we could stay here all day talking about these things. We can't, unfortunately, but I do want to reference the TMF4 group. You know, perhaps they'll be addressed in the review, and I hope so. And I remember myself and Lisa campaigned in Mayo, and they were one of the really strong groups that were doing it at the time. So yes, it's important to recognise that, and thank you for mentioning them, Marion. I also want to say I went through midwife care, and it was the best, and I know it's something in the policy as well. Every woman should have the option of going full midwife care if that's what they want for their pregnancy. Again, we didn't get to talk about everything, but also breastfeeding is a massive part. Preparing for breastfeeding in your pregnancy is a huge thing. We need more supports for that, not just lactation consultants, but all the midwives. We need more midwives, and then they'll have the time to actually just spend 10 minutes with you, and that's all you need. So yeah, just to resource, I guess, the healthcare there, and to support the WHO code on breastfeeding, which is supporting mothers and infants and children up to 36 months, that we're not bombarding them with advertising, which I don't know if you've been through a pregnancy recently, the amount of advertising that comes to you online from infant formula companies is horrendous. So I'm really hoping that the online media safety bill deals with that it's dealt with by the Department of Agriculture through the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, and by the Department of Communications through advertising. And I know Lisa is going to consider mentioning it in her health bill as well. So these are all really important things that we haven't had an opportunity to talk about today, but hopefully these are broader conversations that will continue now that it has the platform, and I'm sure there's much more that will come up in the panel. Thank you sincerely, Sinead, Rosanna, Laura and Catherine, and thank you all for your questions as well.
Thank you very much, Evie.